Oh, that's good there, Fury. Ransom go right. Maybe just rolls it a bit tighter, but it still lands. There from Wilder. Good left hook as well from Wilder.
Oh, it's gone down. It's gone down. He's gone down.
Today's Top Boxing News.
D'ailleurs, peut-être un peu plus chez Viviane.
Et là, Maïva se
We'll start with this. Alexander Usyk versus Carlos Takam is now reportedly agreed for the undisputed cruiserweight champion's heavyweight debut on May 18th in Chicago. And this is per Mike Kopinger. It seems that Alexander Usyk and his team have taken their foot off the gas a bit. The reason I say this is because one of the guys that was touted to face Usyk in his heavyweight debut was Alexander Povetkin. Alexander Povetkin, who just so happens to have knocked out Carlos Takam back in 2014. My interpretation of this fight and my thoughts are that they have decided to take things a little slower, and that's you can make that deduction based on them fighting Takam instead of Povetkin, because Takam, he's a good, well-rounded fighter, and he can pose his own set of challenges to a guy who's moving into the weight class, you understand. He can bring something to the table for Usyk to have to work around, but not bring so much to the table that Usyk might be in over his head, that he may be taking on too much too soon, the way Mikey Garcia did this past weekend. Another story. Point being, I can see the rhyme and the reason as to why they decided to go with Takam instead of Povetkin. Because Takam has been in there with a lot of high caliber, high quality heavyweights, and even though a lot of those guys beat him, he didn't always make it easy for them. He's been in there with anybody from, Alexander Povetkin, to Joseph Parker, to Anthony Joshua, to Derek Chisora. Understand that, yes, Carlos Takam lost those fights. He lost those fights. But he still posed enough challenges to make it interesting. So for a guy who's moving into the weight class, a guy who hasn't really done shit up there, for a guy moving into the weight class, this would be an ideal choice. A guy that has experience, veteran experience, but not so much that you're biting off more than you can chew. I mean, that's no way to debut in a weight class. Granted, it's a great way to make a statement, but it can backfire. So I see why they went with this guy. I have no complaints about the fight because Usyk is not the kind of fighter that gives you much to complain about. This guy don't got a lot of pro fights to begin with, but look at what he's accomplished so far. He wiped his whole ass with the cruiserweight division, and now he's going up there to test his mettle in the heavyweight division. This guy won every belt that he's got by going to other people's backyards and beating them there. So why would I complain about Alexander Usyk at this point in the juncture? I'm perfectly okay with him taking his time and acclimating to this weight class on his own terms. The division's not going to get up and leave. You don't need to be in a hurry to go fight Anthony Joshua, for example, or Deontay Wilder. You can take your time, acclimate to the division, locate what the problem areas might be, see how it feels before you decide to fight for a world title. I've got no problems with it. So I'll be looking forward to that fight on May 18th. Moving on, in the women's lightweight division, promising young up-and-comer Chantelle Cameron appears to have a fight day. She's going to be fighting in York Hall on April 26th against an opponent that has yet to be announced. Now, I don't imagine that this is going to be, someone along the lines of a Delphine Pursoon, for example. Somebody like that, like a high-level opponent. I don't imagine that Chantelle Cameron's next opponent is going to be someone along those lines. I do, however, think she is inching closer and closer to a world title shot. And if you've been paying attention to what's going on in that weight class, undoubtedly, she could square off against Katie Taylor sometime in the near future. It being that Katie Taylor, as it stands, is only one belt away from becoming the undisputed lightweight champion. If she squares off against Delphine Pursoon in June, as the rumor mill has been spinning, if she squares off against her and beats her and becomes the undisputed lightweight champion, that would then mean that any contender climbing those ranks, any one of those 4 ranks, whether you're talking about the WBC, the WBA, the WBO, or the IBF, any contender in that entire weight class with any aspirations of becoming a champion will have to go through Katie Taylor to do it. And it just so happens that Chantelle Cameron is one of those contenders. So it's conceivable that if Katie beats Delphine in June, if the fight comes off in June and Katie beats her in June, becomes the undisputed champion of that weight class, closes off all the alternate routes, all the alternate avenues for any contender looking to get a belt. If she seals the deal, it's only a matter of time before her and Chantelle lock horns. It's only a matter of time before her and Chantelle have to fight, because Chantelle Cameron is inching closer and closer to a world title shot. And if Katie's got all the titles, then them fighting is only a matter of time as opposed to a matter of chance and circumstance. If Katie's got all the belts, there's only one way for you to become a champion in that weight class, and it's to go through her to get them. Now, I will say this, that before it comes to that, before she is at the point that the sanctioning bodies, the powers that be, are mandating a fight like that, before it gets to that point, I'm of the opinion that maybe Chantelle Cameron should get Rose Volante on the phone. Maybe she should see if she can orchestrate a fight between her and the now former WBO champion. I think that that's an opportunity to cross-compare performances between Chantelle and Katie against a common opponent. Just as well as Chantelle Cameron inches closer to a Katie Taylor world title shot, it behooves her to step up the competition, step up in class, fight some of these fighters that give you something to have to work around. Rose Volante would be one of those fighters because, much like Chantelle, she's a very strong puncher. Understand that even though the beating that Katie Taylor put on Rose Volante was very much one-sided, it didn't look like Rose had much to offer. Don't judge the entirety of her career and the entirety of her abilities based on that one performance. Where Katie might have been able to put on a one-sided beating against Rose Volante, that might not apply to everybody.
It might not.
You know, here's an example. Both Katie Taylor and Chantelle Cameron beat Vivian Obanoff to a pulp. Both of them beat that girl to a pulp. But when Natasha Jonas squared off against that same Vivian Obanoff, she didn't have that good fortune. She got put out. I say that to say this. Don't jump to the conclusion
That what works for one works for the
that
other.
just because Katie beats somebody, that everybody's gonna beat somebody, you know? Don't jump to the conclusion that because Katie can beat a fighter in dominant fashion, that everybody's just gonna walk in there and do the same thing. Katie Taylor is Katie Taylor, and other people are other people. And it's for this reason that I still would like to see a fight between a Chantelle Cameron and a Rose Volante, so we can cross-compare how these fighters perform against a common opponent. Not necessarily a triangle theory, not looking to forecast an outcome based on how two fighters perform against a common opponent, nothing like that, but just being able to use that opponent as a barometer for where Chantelle Cameron is right now. Are you on the same level? Are you competing at the level to where you can beat a fighter like this in dominant fashion? That's what I'm looking to see, and I would like to see a fight between them. I wouldn't mind if one of these alphabets called that as some kind of an eliminator, you know, an eliminator towards a world title shot. So I'm hoping that maybe, just maybe, the boxing gods will make that fight a possibility, because I'd very much like to see Chantelle Cameron fight that caliber of an opponent before a Katie Taylor fight rolls around. So, you know, those are just a few passing thoughts ahead of the news that Chantelle Cameron is going to be back in action in April at your call. Just a few things to think about. In other news, in regards to Tyson Fury and just who exactly is he going to be facing next now that he's officially walked away from a Deontay Wilder rematch, it appears that an unbeaten German contender by the name of Tom Schwartz is a name that's been thrown in the hat as Tyson Fury's possible next opponent. And let's just look at Tom Schwartz for a second here. Let's assess what he is or isn't capable of. And he sports a professional record of 24 wins, 16 knockouts with no losses, standing in at about 6'6", just about the same height as an Anthony Joshua minus the musculature. he seems like a solid contender. You know, I don't want to relegate a guy to being a bad fighter, especially when he hasn't lost a fight. But I'll tell you that upon reviewing the footage of Tom Schwartz in action, it's not a lot there to write home about. Seems like a solid enough fighter. He hasn't lost a fight yet, but at the same time, he hasn't faced anyone on the level of a, Joseph Parker, for example, or a Derek Chisora, a Dillian White, much less a Tyson Fury. So when you look at the footage of this guy, and you're looking for the virtues and the characteristics of this fighter, you have to be mindful that even if you're seeing some things that are looking kind of okay, they're looking kind of okay against a lower tier, a lower quality of competition than what he would face with Tyson Fury. I noticed the employment of the jab with Tom Schwartz, He throws it out there, sometimes doubles up on it, uses it as a key to get within proximity of his opponents. Pretty standard issue, run-of-the-mill use of the jab, though I'm not particularly impressed with his use, because in spite of his use of the jab, you still see this guy get hit with overhand rights. And that jab is not just an offensive tool, it's a defensive tool to protect that side of your face. I mean, it can be a defensive tool, or it's supposed to be, and the fact that Tom Schwartz is catching these overhand rights on that side of his face in spite of his employment of the jab, that communicates to me that when he's firing that left hand, he's not bringing it back fast enough to protect that side of his face.
So he's open to the right.
His timing with that jab, it must not be the best, because with some good timing, you can offset that right hand.
Neutralize
if you have a judicious jab.
Big if.
You can make it to where the other guy doesn't really want to throw it because of how much you are pumping that left hand in that guy's face. Just as well, the left hand of Tom Schwartz does at times in the midst of a fight sail a little low. That's a part of what makes him susceptible to overhand rights. Schwartz does show some ability to roll those shots, some maneuvering capability, that he got a bit of bounce, got a bit of pep in his step, rolls a punch or two, but it's going to be that much harder to do with Tyson Fury, because Fury's going to be the taller guy in the ring. There aren't a lot of guys in the heavyweight division that have the physical dimensions of a Tyson Fury. Do realize that Tyson Fury is big, even for a heavyweight, and it's going to be that much harder to roll shots from a guy who's as nimble, as elusive, as spontaneous as Tyson Fury, who just so happens to have one hell of a wingspan. So you keeping that left hand low, you might pay for it, and he might make you pay for it. Look at the combinations of Tom Schwartz, and they appear a little bit frenzied. They don't appear to be educated punches. They don't appear to be part of a greater stratagem or part of a plan. It's more like a frenzied attack that, he keys his way in with his jab and then lets his hands go, which isn't a bad thing. At least he lets his hands go.
Not bad.
But these really aren't educated punches, and the implementation of those punches, they're not really short, sharp shots that are defensible, compact punches. There does appear to be a good amount of space between those punches for something to come back at Tom Schwartz. So to surmise my thoughts on Tom potentially being Tyson Fury's opponent, I see a guy in Tom Schwartz that Tyson Fury could outskill, could outpoint, a guy that it's entirely possible he can beat comfortably. Because Tyson Fury's not some lumbering lummox, you understand. This is arguably one of the most statuesque guys in the entire weight class who moves better than most of them.
In spite of his size.
Tyson Fury's a guy with a wingspan to where he can comfortably fight you from the outside. He can fight the whole fight from the outside, but just as well, he's elusive enough to get right up on you and land short punches that surprise you, short punches that you weren't expecting. And given his overall size, just his body mass, there may be more power on those shots than you think. Even though he's not firing them as power shots, they might sting as if they were power shots. So if Tom Schwartz is the next guy that Tyson Fury's going to be fighting, I can definitely see Tyson Fury winning this fight, in spite of the fact that Tom Schwartz is a young, undefeated guy with a professional record of 24-0, 16 knockouts. I do see a fight that Tyson Fury can win comfortably. Those things in mind, there does appear to be a lot of criticism over who Tyson Fury's going to be fighting. People are already calling this guy a bum. You understand? They're already calling him a bum. I've got my reservations about calling an undefeated fighter a bum. It's not something that I do myself, but I already see that there is a large amount of criticism being levied toward Tyson Fury, and it's obvious why. It's because unless Fury were going to fight Wilder next, there's a lot of people out there that were going to be pissed off. That's saying that unless it's Deontay Wilder, these guys weren't going to be happy. But to that, I'll say this. Tyson Fury could have went out there, right? Say he walks away from the Wilder rematch. because he's raw about the decision. He doesn't think it was a draw. He thinks he won that fight. A lot of other people do too. So he walks away from the rematch on that premise. He gets in bed with Top Rank, further distancing himself from the rematch with Wilder. But I'll go as far as saying that these guys were going to be pissed off anyway. They're not looking at both sides of the spectrum. They're just looking at Wilder's side of the spectrum because they're hanging off of that guy's nuts. These are the guys that'll tell you that Wilder did enough to win the fight just because he scored 2 knockdowns, even though most people will tell you that Tyson Fury did enough in spite of the 2 knockdowns, that he should have got a decision. These guys aren't looking at both sides of the fence, whereas I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, it's 2 things going on here. 1, he might be raw about the decision, and 2, Top Rank incentivized a big enough cash incentive that greatly exceeded whatever he stood to make with Wilder. So with those 2 things in mind, he decided to walk away. He decided to walk away from a bad decision and poor scoring, and he decided to walk away from a pay-per-view opportunity that didn't really yield great rewards. That's saying these guys are going to be mad at Fury regardless. Fury could go in there and fight Parker. He could go in there and fight Dillian White. He could go as far as going in there and fighting Anthony Joshua. All they're going to say is he's ducking, and they're ducking, and Wilder's being ducked. That's all they're going to say. They're not going to be happy either way. No matter who Tyson Fury fights from here on out. They're not going to be happy until they see a Fury versus Wilder rematch. So when I see them trying to call this guy a bum and make some kind of assessment as far as how good the guy is, look, maybe the guy's not great, but the only real reason you're being so short-sighted about the opponent is because you're mad that the Wilder fight isn't happening. Y'all motherfuckers ain't going to be happy no matter who he fights now. That's the bottom line. So really, it's just another chapter in the same book. Same usual suspects crying and complaining that Wilder can't have his way. Well, maybe if you guys didn't endorse the quote-unquote draw that really should have been a Tyson Fury decision, at least most people think so, that's the popular opinion, if a winner would have actually been determined, then you would have got to see the rematch. But you guys, you're happy endorsing the draw. Some of you even think Wilder won the fight. Well, you can think that. I mean, you can think that till the cows come home. But the reality is, without a winner and a loser, that rematch clause is null and void. The rematch clause only works in the event that somebody wins and somebody loses. Well, nobody won and nobody lost because it was a draw, and you endorsed that draw, so here we are. It's a tough titty with an even tougher nipple. Suck on it. Suck it up. Suck that shit up. Y'all happy endorsing bad decisions just because it benefits a fighter that you like. You're happy that he gets to keep his quote-unquote unbeaten record. But there's consequences that come attached to that, and these are those consequences. You can't want Wilder to keep his unbeaten record, quote-unquote, and have a rematch at the same time. He's unbeaten, remember? It was a draw. And y'all was happy as fuck to hear that shit. I know y'all was. Y'all was happy as fuck to hear it's a draw. Because it looked a lot like he lost that fight.